But we have seen urban areas that have gone, shall we say, whole hog for these kinds of planning policies, where businesses are becoming very concerned about the impact on their communities. Businesses are leaving or avoiding Portland because of traffic congestion, and there is a view in Vancouver, British Columbia, which has similar policy that congestion is eroding competitiveness there as well. The fact is, if we look historically, as we have done, using data that was supplied by Angus Maddison, the late economist at the OECD, on the history of economic development in the world, if you look at the highest GDP per capita nations at various intervals from 1500 to the present, what you find is that as transportation improved, so too did GDP per capita. You can see between the early 1800s and 1900, when transit was growing and was king, substantial improvement in the GDP per capita. And then with the coming of the car, an exponential growth. So mobility and the GDP and economic growth are all very closely related. Prudhomme and Chong at the University of Paris have shown, as Sam Staley indicated in his presentation a few moments ago, substantial improvement in economic growth that occurs as a result of expanding the distance that people can travel in a particular period of time in an urban area. Our own research says basically the same thing. If you look at daily motorized trips and the gross domestic product per capita, what you find is a very strong correlation. As motorized trips increase per capita, GDP per capita also increases. It's not the only issue, but it is an important issue. Waller and Hughes at the Progressive Policy Institute published research that suggested the importance of getting cars to low-income people because of the fact that jobs are dispersed throughout the metropolitan area. They're not just in the core, and that's not just in the United States. That's in Europe and Japan as well. And their view was stated quite well. They say that in most cases the shortest distance between a poor person and getting a job is along the line driven in a car. So cars are a factor for reducing poverty and expanding prosperity, which is something we certainly need to do. Raphael and Stoll at the University of California, Berkeley have done research that suggests that if all African American households had cars, nearly one-half of the gap in unemployment between African Americans and non-Hispanic whites would be closed. One of the strategies that the anti-highway and anti-car people would like to implement and are pushing hard is so-called high-speed rail, which is really slower speed rail, such as the Midwest High-Speed Rail Initiative, which would add significant amounts of new passenger trains to existing freight tracks. This could create a real problem in the long run because there is the possibility that it could make the freight railroads less competitive and divert business to the trucking industry. I realize the trucking industry would have no objection to that. My concern is, though, that we're not building the highways we need to keep congestion under control, and this is an impact that is not being thought of at the moment. Another factor, of course, is the extent to which the proposed policies impact house prices. I realize that's not your principal issue, but it is of interest that some 4.5 million people moved from the highest cost markets, the more regulated markets, to lower cost markets just from 2000 to 2007 as the bubble was increasing. But the basic point with respect to these policies is that while highway users may not have an apparent interest in the land use planning portions of the proposed agenda, recognize, of course, that as we force higher densities, we are going to increase traffic congestion more, and we have an obligation then to expand highways more to make sure we do not retard the level of service. And believe me, The people that are proposing these kinds of policies have no intention of providing sufficient highway capacity, and that is going to hurt not just you and your business and your life and your commute. It's going to hurt the economy substantially in the longer run. Which brings us now to the issue of personal mobility and greenhouse gas emissions, an important issue. One of the issues that is routinely missed or underestimated by the proponents of these smart growth policies is the extent to which greater traffic congestion would nullify any gains from reducing the number of miles that are traveled by people. This is indicated by looking at the Texas Transportation Institute data from 1982 that shows how greenhouse gas emissions from wasted fuel increase relative to hours of delay. It's a substantial difference. And of course, remember that burning 1 gallon of gasoline is going to produce 19.4 pounds of CO2 or greenhouse gas emissions. It doesn't matter whether you're driving 10 miles an hour or 100 miles an hour. So this is a very real issue, and it really shows that the very idea of attempting to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from reducing vehicle miles traveled in more congested environments is liable to produce no gain whatsoever. In research in a TRB publication, Trieber and others showed how significant this loss can be as congestion increases. Looking at California freeways, they found that at 42 miles per hour, the average fuel economy was in the range of 35 miles per gallon, a little bit above that. But when you go down to congested conditions on the freeway and get down to 16 miles per gallon, or 16 miles per hour, you're also down about 16 miles per gallon. And what that indicates is a very substantial increase in greenhouse gas emissions as fuel consumption increases while congestion increases. Again, vehicle miles traveled, as Marcus Bowman told us a few minutes ago, is not a very effective way of attempting to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, especially if you force higher densities, which will make things only worse. And we can see the difference between the potential of technology, as Marcus indicated to us before, and social engineering with respect to their potential for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. I'll take just a little time with this chart, but if we look at the round green, the green line made out of circles, what we see is the greenhouse gas emissions that were projected based upon the 2000 fleet with no improvement in CAFE standards, which was the plan, of course, or which was before the Congress acted, in 2007. You see that we were going to see very substantial increase, about 45% in greenhouse gas emissions from cars and light vehicles between 2005 and 2030. Well, that was changed radically with the coming of the Bush and then the slight increase in the Obama regulations that require 35.5 miles per gallon for new cars in 2016. You can see the huge reduction from about a 45% increase in greenhouse gas emissions to a small reduction. Now consider this. We have our growing cooler, our moving cooler, and our driving in the built environment reports that tell us about all of the wonderful improvements we're going to get from greenhouse gas emissions if we force people to drive less and live closer together. Well, look at that dark blue line, which is somewhat overlapping the Department of Energy production from the Obama new car standards for 2016. That's all you get from social engineering, the difference between the yellow line and the dark blue line. Now the next two lines are just shown, the light blue and sort of the rust-colored lines are shown just to indicate the glide path for a 50% and an 80% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from cars by 2050. Notice that if we were all to drive Toyota Priuses by 2030 at 51 miles per gallon, we would actually be on course to exceed a goal of an 80% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. And by the way, as Marcus indicated with respect to the research he's done, the future looks much better than that, and I should make sure you all are aware that Volkswagen is prepared to come to the market now with a car that has been demonstrated to get 235 miles per gallon, an internal combustion engine car. So clearly, technology is the way to solve the problem of greenhouse gas emissions in the long run. Which brings us finally to the last slide, and I just want to suggest that being economically competitive and reducing poverty is very important. And we are in an increasingly competitive world. And the Chinese are not going to, for example, tie their hands behind their backs in their competition with us. And China is just the beginning. China, in the long run, could be our greatest competitor, but India is not far behind. This is a picture of Shenzhen, just north of Hong Kong. This is now an urban area of in the neighborhood of 15 million people. In 1979, when the Special Economic Zone was established by Premier Deng Xiaoping, all we had here was a fishing village. And what I'm suggesting is that we cannot afford to go back. We cannot afford higher levels of poverty, and we cannot afford stunted economic growth. And these kinds of effects are inevitable if we put serious limits on mobility, not only because it's going to slow down the trucks, but it's also going to slow down the commutes and have us all having to spend much more time than we need to traveling, and less time in the more primary activities that we're interested in being involved in. Thank you very much.